Capricorn, if this finds you right now, it's not random. You didn't get here by accident. You've carried more than most, quietly, without applause, without anyone really seeing how heavy it was. And here's what you need to hear first. Your struggle was not ignored. You were tested longer because you were built stronger. If you're ready to receive what's been preparing itself for you, type "I receive" in the comments. Not for me, but as a quiet agreement with what's unfolding. Because from here, we're stepping into the part of your story where things finally begin to shift. Capricorn, if you're still here with me, stay just a moment longer. Not because you have to, but because something in you already knows this is meant for you. You've lived long enough carrying silence like armor, wearing strength so naturally that even you forgot how heavy it became. There were nights when no one checked in, when you kept moving anyway, when you told yourself, just one more day, just get through this part, and you did. Again and again. What most people never saw was how often you chose steadiness over collapse, how often you swallowed words because being reliable felt safer than being vulnerable. That choice shaped you, not into someone hardened, but into someone grounded. You learned how to stand when the ground beneath you felt uncertain. You learned how to keep your heart intact while the world kept testing its weight. And maybe no one ever said it out loud, so let me say it here, quietly, just between us. Nothing about your endurance was accidental. Some people break under pressure because they were never meant to carry it. You learned how to breathe inside it. That didn't happen overnight. It happened slowly, through repetition, through disappointment, through moments where you questioned if holding on was still worth it. You didn't become strong because life was kind. You became strong because you stayed present when it wasn't. And here's something important. Something I don't want you to rush past. The fact that you're still standing doesn't mean it was easy. It means you were willing to keep going without guarantees. That kind of strength leaves a mark, not on your face, but on your timing. Things begin to recognize you differently after that. Doors don't open loudly for someone like you. They open quietly. At the exact moment you're finally ready to walk through without doubting yourself. And you might not feel it yet. That's okay. Change doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it arrives as a soft shift in the way your chest feels when you wake up. A little less tight, a little more space. Sometimes it shows up as relief you didn't expect, as support you didn't ask for but somehow needed. And sometimes it begins with nothing more than this moment, a pause, a breath, a sense that maybe you don't have to brace yourself the way you used to. Capricorn, you didn't come this far just to keep surviving. There's a reason your story didn't end in the chapters that almost broke you. There's a reason your patience didn't go unnoticed. And as you sit with that thought, just let it land gently. You don't need to rush. You don't need to prove anything right now. Just stay here, with the quiet knowing that something is already rearranging itself around the steadiness you built. And as we move forward together, you'll start to notice how what once felt like resistance begins to feel like release. Not all at once, but enough to remind you that you were never meant to carry everything alone. Capricorn, there's a question you've asked yourself more times than you admit. Not out loud, not to anyone else. Just quietly, in the spaces between responsibilities. Why does it always feel heavier for me? Why do I seem to carry more than others? You watched people walk away when things got hard. You watched others break or give up or choose an easier road. And somehow, you stayed. Not because you enjoyed the wait, but because something inside you refused to leave things unfinished. That question you've carried was never a complaint. It was a search for meaning. And here's the truth that deserves to be spoken gently. Not everyone could walk the path you've walked without losing themselves. Not everyone could sit inside that pressure and still keep their integrity intact. You were not asked to hold more because you were expendable. You were asked because you were dependable. There is a difference. Strength like yours doesn't announce itself. It shows up early. It stays late. It keeps going even when no one is watching. You learned how to carry responsibility before you learned how to ask for help. You learned how to stay composed while your insides were working overtime, just to stay steady. And over time, that did something to you. It grounded you. You became someone who could stand inside uncertainty without letting it erode your values. You became someone who could absorb pressure without letting it turn into bitterness. That kind of resilience is not accidental. Those long seasons that felt unfair were not meant to crush you. They were shaping a foundation strong enough to support what's meant to rest on it next. Think about it for a moment. Anything built to last requires deeper roots, more patience, more time underground before anything visible appears. You've spent years strengthening what no one else could see: your discernment, your self-control, your ability to keep showing up without losing your sense of self. That is not weakness. That is quiet mastery. And yes, there were moments you almost doubted it, moments when you wondered if carrying this much was costing you too much. But here you are, still present, still intact, still willing to believe that all of this effort was leading somewhere meaningful. Capricorn, the pressure didn't harden you. It refined you. It taught you when to speak and when silence carried more power. It taught you when to hold the line and when to release what no longer belonged to you. And as you sit with that truth, notice how it lands, not as a surge of excitement, but as a steady sense of recognition. Because on some level, you've always known this wasn't punishment. It was preparation. Preparation for a phase where you no longer have to prove how strong you are, where your steadiness begins to attract support instead of resistance, where the weight starts to shift from your shoulders to the structure you've already built. And as we continue forward, you may begin to sense that the ground beneath you feels more reliable than it used to. Not because life stopped testing you, but because you no longer have to carry it alone. Just stay with that feeling, let it settle, because what you endured did not make you late. It made you ready. Capricorn, there were moments you honestly thought this was where you would break. Not in a dramatic way, not in front of anyone, but quietly, in the middle of a normal day, when you were still doing what needed to be done while something inside you felt dangerously thin. You questioned yourself then, not your strength, but your capacity. How much more can one person hold? How long can I keep standing like this? And even in those moments, you didn't collapse. You adjusted, you slowed your breath, you kept your posture steady even while your insides were shaking. That wasn't stubbornness, that was instinct. There is something deep within you that knows how to brace without becoming rigid, how to bend without breaking. You didn't survive because it was easy. You survived because some part of you refused to let the story end there, and that matters, because pressure reveals what's real. When things get heavy, what's fragile cracks, what's false falls away, but what's rooted tightens its grip and holds. That's what happened to you. Those moments that nearly broke you did something else instead. They taught your nervous system how to stay calm inside chaos. They taught your mind how to stay focused when distractions were screaming for your attention. They taught your heart how to remain open without becoming naive. That kind of learning doesn't come from comfort. It comes from being tested again and again and realizing you're still here, still capable, still clear, still choosing to move forward even when the path felt steep. Capricorn, you didn't harden, you tempered. Like metal refined by heat, you didn't lose your shape. You gained resilience. You became someone who can feel deeply without being undone by it. Someone who can experience disappointment without letting it redefine their worth. That didn't happen by accident. It happened because you stayed present when it would have been easier to shut down. You stayed honest when it would have been easier to become bitter. And slowly, without fanfare, you crossed a threshold. One where life no longer needs to test whether you can endure, because you already proved that. Now the question shifts, not can you survive this, but what happens when you no longer have to? What happens when strength is no longer about holding everything together, but about allowing support to meet you halfway? That thought might feel unfamiliar, even uncomfortable, and that's okay. You've spent so long being the one who holds, who stabilizes, who doesn't lean too hard on anyone else. So give yourself a moment to breathe into a different possibility, a quieter one, where the ground beneath you feels less hostile, more cooperative, where you don't have to brace before every step. You may notice it subtly, in how your shoulders drop without you telling them to, in how decisions feel clear without forcing them, in how the weight you carried begins to redistribute itself almost on its own. Nothing dramatic, nothing rushed. Just a sense that life is no longer pushing against you the way it used to. And as that realization settles, let it remind you of something important. You didn't go through all of that just to remain unshaken. You went through it to become unmovable in the ways that matter. So stay here with that feeling. Let it anchor you. Because what once felt like a breaking point has quietly become the place where everything started to hold. Capricorn, there's a feeling that's been following you lately. Subtle. Easy to miss if you're not paying attention. It's the sense that something is no longer pushing back the way it used to. For a long time, it felt like every step forward met resistance, as if life itself kept placing its hand on your chest, saying not yet, not now, not this way. You tried to reason with it. You tried to work harder. You tried patience. You tried endurance. And still, certain doors stayed closed without explanation. People shifted. Situations stalled. Timing slipped just out of reach. Not because you weren't ready, but because that season had a limit. And quietly, without ceremony, that limit has been reached. You may not have noticed the exact moment it changed. These things rarely announce themselves. They show up as fewer obstacles where there used to be many, as conversations that flow where there was once friction, as a strange sense of relief when you stop forcing outcomes and realize you no longer have to. Capricorn, what once resisted you was never meant to stay forever. Those delays had a purpose. Those closed doors served a role. They slowed you long enough for something inside you to stabilize. They redirected you away from paths that would have demanded too much of you for too little return. And now, their job is done. That doesn't mean everything suddenly becomes effortless. It means the energy has shifted from opposition to cooperation. You'll feel it first in small ways, in how decisions feel less heavy, in how you no longer question your instincts the way you once did, in how the world seems to respond instead of resist. This isn't luck, and it isn't coincidence. It's timing, aligning with the strength you've already built. Capricorn, you spent years learning how to push through, how to endure, how to keep moving even when nothing moved with you. But there comes a moment when persistence is no longer the lesson, when effort gives way to alignment. That moment doesn't shout, it exhales. It feels like the room finally quiets after a long stretch of noise. You don't have to convince anyone anymore. You don't have to fight circumstances into submission. Things begin to meet you halfway, and that might feel unfamiliar. You've been braced for so long that ease can feel suspicious at first. So, let yourself adjust. Slowly, let your shoulders drop without checking if it's safe. Let yourself believe that not every good thing requires struggle to earn it. You've already earned your steadiness. Now, you're stepping into a phase where steadiness attracts support instead of obstacles, where your presence opens doors that effort alone never could. Notice how the air feels lighter when you stop pushing against what's already moving. Notice how life responds when you stop proving and start allowing. Capricorn, this isn't about losing control. It's about recognizing that control was never meant to be carried alone. And as you stay with this moment, with this quiet realization, let it settle gently. Because when resistance fades, clarity follows. And clarity has a way of revealing opportunities that we're always waiting for the right moment to be seen. Just remain present. Let the shift continue without rushing it. You're no longer standing in front of closed doors. You're standing in the space where movement feels natural again. And from here, what unfolds will feel less like a battle and more like a response. Capricorn, you may have noticed something changing without being able to name it yet. Not a dramatic moment, not a loud breakthrough. Just a quiet sense that life is no longer wobbling the way it once did. You've never needed spectacle. You've never trusted quick fixes. What you've always wanted, even when you didn't say it out loud, was stability that could breathe. A steady ground that doesn't disappear the moment you relax your shoulders. And that's exactly how these changes arrive. Softly, respectfully. They don't rush you. They don't demand belief. They simply show up when you're finally aligned enough to recognize them. You might notice it in a door you stopped knocking on because it felt pointless. One day it opens anyway. Not because you pushed harder, but because the timing caught up to the strength you've already built. You might notice it in an opportunity that feels oddly calm. No panic, no pressure, just a quiet knowing that you're ready now, in a way. You weren't before, and you might notice it in people. Not the loud ones, not the ones who drain you, but the ones who arrive without complication, who don't need you to prove yourself, who don't test your limits. They recognize your steadiness and meet it with their own. Capricorn, this is how real change works for you. It doesn't explode into your life. It integrates. It restores rhythm. You begin to trust your pace again. You stop rushing decisions just to feel movement. And for the first time in a long while, you feel supported without being managed, seen without being evaluated. That matters more than you realize, because you've spent years being the strong one, the dependable one, the one who carries responsibility without asking for reassurance. So, when stability begins to return, it doesn't feel like excitement. It feels like relief, like exhaling after holding your breath for far too long. And you don't announce it. You don't make a show of it. You simply notice that life is no longer asking you to brace for impact. You're allowed to walk forward without scanning for what might go wrong. That doesn't make you careless, it makes you grounded. Capricorn, these moments are subtle because they respect your nature. You don't need to be convinced. You need to feel it in your body, in how your sleep improves, in how your decisions feel clearer, in how your intuition stops whispering warnings and starts offering guidance. That's when you know, not because something flashy happened, but because something solid returned. Trust that. Trust the quiet alignment. Trust the steady openings. You've already done the hard part. Now, your role is simply to stay present as life begins to respond to the version of you that no longer needs to struggle to be taken seriously. Let the changes keep unfolding at their natural pace. Let them confirm what you've felt deep down for a while now. That what's coming to meet you is not chaos, it's clarity. And as you sit with that feeling just a moment longer, you may begin to sense how this calm is preparing you for something meaningful that's already finding its way toward you. Capricorn, there was a season that taught you how to do everything alone, not because you wanted to, but because you didn't see another option. You learned how to carry responsibility before you learned how to share the weight. You learned how to stay composed even when you were exhausted, and somewhere along the way, doing it all yourself became normal. You stopped explaining. You stopped asking. Not out of pride, out of habit. You told yourself it was easier this way, cleaner, more controlled. But the truth is, it was never easy. It was just familiar. You became the one people relied on, the one who handled things, the one who didn't fall apart even when things fell on top of you. And that strength earned respect. But it also cost you something. Because holding everything together leaves very little room to be held yourself. You rarely let anyone see how tired you were, how often you pushed past your limits without pausing to ask if it was still necessary. You carried more than your share because you believed that was what strong people did. Capricorn, that belief served you for a time, but it was never meant to be permanent. There comes a moment when self-reliance quietly transforms into self-isolation, not because you push people away, but because you never gave them a place to stand beside you. And here's the part I want you to hear slowly. Support does not diminish your strength. The right kind of support recognizes it. What begins to shift now is not your independence. It's the assumption that you have to do everything alone in order to be respected. You don't. You've already proven who you are through consistency, through integrity, through endurance. There's nothing left to demonstrate. And as life responds to that truth, help arrives differently, not as rescue, not as charity, but as collaboration. People begin to meet you at your level. They don't question your capability, they complement it. You'll notice it in small moments first, someone stepping in before you ask, a conversation where you feel heard without having to explain yourself twice, opportunities that don't require over-functioning just to stay afloat. This is not weakness finding you, it's alignment. Capricorn, you've gone far enough on your own strength. Now the balance begins to return, not by taking anything away from you, but by redistributing the weight so it no longer rests entirely on your shoulders. And that may feel unfamiliar. You might catch yourself wanting to take control back, wanting to say, "It's fine, I've got it." Pause there, just for a moment. Notice what it feels like to let someone else hold part of the structure without fear that it will collapse. That pause is where healing lives, because healing for you was never about becoming softer. It was about learning that strength can be shared without being diluted. You are still capable, still steady, still reliable, but now you are also supported. And that combination changes how far you can go without burning out. Let yourself adjust to this new rhythm, one where effort is balanced by response, one where you don't have to prove your worth through exhaustion. You've already walked long enough to earn rest without guilt. And as this understanding settles, notice how something inside you loosens. Not your discipline, not your drive, just the grip that kept you from receiving what was always meant to meet you halfway. Stay with that feeling, because when strength no longer has to stand alone, it becomes something else entirely. It becomes sustainable. Capricorn, there's a quiet moment that arrives after long seasons of effort. It doesn't feel like celebration. It feels like recognition. Not from the world, from life itself. You've spent years holding certain things steady when it would have been easier to let them slip. Your values, your word, your sense of right and wrong, even when cutting corners would have brought faster results. You stayed honest when no one was watching. You stayed consistent when shortcuts were available. You stayed true to yourself, even when being true came with a cost. And that matters more than you were ever told. Because the return you're stepping into now was never about luck. It was built slowly, choice by choice, moment by moment. Every time you chose integrity over convenience. Every time you chose patience over reaction. Every time you chose to remain yourself, instead of reshaping your values to fit someone else's expectations. Those moments stacked up, quietly. You didn't see the impact right away. Most people never do. But life keeps track of what is preserved under pressure. And now, what you protected is beginning to protect you. Capricorn, this is not about being rewarded for suffering. It's about alignment finally catching up to character. The things you refuse to compromise have become your entry point into a different kind of experience. One where you don't have to justify yourself. One where your steadiness speaks first. You may notice that conversations change, that people respond differently to you. Not because you're louder, but because you're clearer. You know what you stand for now without needing to defend it. And that clarity opens doors that effort alone never could. There's a calm authority that settles in when you realize you don't need to prove who you are anymore. You've already done that through time. Capricorn, the season of struggle trained your endurance. This season recognizes your discernment. You're not being asked to fight for your place. You're being invited to occupy it. That invitation doesn't come with noise or drama. It comes with ease, with situations that fit instead of resist, with opportunities that feel natural instead of forced, with a sense that you no longer need to negotiate your own worth. And that might feel unfamiliar. You're used to effort being the currency, used to earning everything through persistence. So, allow yourself a moment to receive without suspicion. To accept that what's opening now is not a test, it's a response. A response to the years you chose consistency when inconsistency would have been easier. A response to the times you stayed grounded while everything around you shifted. You didn't lose yourself in the process. And that's why what comes next can actually stay. Capricorn, this is the part where you no longer need to convince, where your presence does the work your words used to do. You don't have to struggle to be taken seriously. You already are. And as you let that realization settle into your body, notice how it changes your posture. Not physically, internally. You stand differently when you know you're no longer trying to earn what you've already embodied. Let that confidence remain quiet. Let it remain grounded, because the strongest shifts don't announce themselves. They simply change what responds to you. And as this sense of return continues to unfold, you may feel something else rising with it. A readiness, not to prove, not to push, but to step forward with less resistance and more trust in what you've already built. Stay with that feeling, because when values become keys, the doors they open tend to lead somewhere worth staying. Capricorn, there is a moment when you realize nothing dramatic needs to happen anymore for everything to be different. It doesn't arrive as a shock. It doesn't knock the air out of your chest. It arrives quietly, almost politely, as a release you didn't know you were still waiting for. You feel it first, not in your circumstances, but in your body. Your shoulders soften without permission. Your breath deepens without effort. The constant tension that once lived in your chest no longer feels necessary. And that's how you know something real has begun. For so long, your strength was measured by how much you could endure, how long you could hold, how little you needed, how rarely you stopped. But that chapter has already done its work. You proved what you needed to prove without ever asking for credit. And now, life no longer needs to test you to see how much pressure you can take. That phase is complete. What replaces it is not ease without meaning. It's support with purpose. You may notice that obstacles don't disappear, but they lose their weight. They no longer drain you. They no longer intimidate you. They feel manageable, almost cooperative. Things begin to flow, not because you're pushing harder, but because you're finally aligned with where your effort belongs. Capricorn, this is what a true turning point feels like. Not fireworks, not chaos, but clarity. The sense that the road ahead is no longer asking you to sacrifice yourself just to move forward. You don't wake up bracing for impact anymore. You wake up grounded, present, aware that what once felt impossible now feels within reach without costing you your peace. That doesn't mean you stop being disciplined. It means your discipline is no longer fueled by fear. It's guided by intention. You begin to trust that your timing is not behind. It never was. It was precise. Everything you needed to become had to be built first. And now, what you're moving toward has the structure to hold you instead of demanding that you hold it. Notice how different that feels. You're no longer dragging yourself forward. You're being met. Not rushed, not pressured, met. Capricorn, this is the part of your story where effort turns into momentum, where stability stops being something you chase and becomes something you stand on. You may still work hard. You may still care deeply. But the struggle no longer defines the outcome. You've crossed the point where life needs to see how much you can take. Now, it begins to respond to who you've become. And that response is gentler than you expected. Support shows up without strings attached. Progress happens without self-sacrifice. You feel less alone even when you're quiet, less pressured even when you're moving forward. Capricorn, you earned this shift by not giving up on yourself when it would have been understandable to do so. And as you sit with that truth, let it settle without rushing to label it. This isn't the end of your effort. It's the beginning of being carried by what you've already built. Let yourself walk into this season without armor. You don't need it here. The path ahead is no longer designed to break you. It's designed to support your next step with less resistance and more trust than you've ever known. And as you stay with that feeling, you'll realize something simple yet profound. You're not starting over. You're continuing with lighter hands and a steadier heart. That's how real change begins. Capricorn, before you go, there's one last thing I want you to sit with. Not as a thought, as a feeling. Everything you just heard was never meant to convince you. It was meant to remind you of something you already carry. You didn't come this far by accident, and you're not standing where you are by chance. The strength you've built is no longer being tested. It's being trusted, and that changes how life responds to you. So, tonight, or whenever you're listening to this, let yourself rest inside that knowing. You don't need to rush. You don't need to explain. You don't need to push the next door open. What's meant to meet you is already moving. If this message resonated, if it felt like it spoke directly to you, leave a quiet sign in the comments. Just write, "I trust myself," not for anyone else to see, but as an agreement with your own path. And if you're a Capricorn who's been walking this journey with intention and integrity, subscribe and stay close. This is a space for steady souls, for people who build slowly, for those who don't need noise to know who they are. The journey doesn't stop here. It continues. Another message is already forming. Another layer is waiting to be revealed. So take this with you. You are not behind. You are not late. You are exactly where your strength can finally be met with support. And I'll be right here when the next message finds you.